Hi, I'm Pete Solomon, and welcome to On the Bookshelf. Each month, we'll meet an author who'll tell us about his work, and this month we're reading The Missing Concordat by Norman Hubley, a Winthrop native who wrote and created this book. The Missing Concordat takes place beginning in 1941 at the Vatican, Germany, Spain. It's a trip through Europe and a very intriguing story. Norman Hubley, On the Bookshelf.
In 1941, Pope Pius XII and Adolf Hitler entered into a secret concordat to be made public only after Hitler's defeat of Russia. They entrusted the document to General Franco of Spain for safekeeping. When Franco died in 1975, his personal papers contained only the bottom half of the last page of the document showing the date and the signatures. The Concordat itself was not there. In 1977, the Vatican published what it said was the missing Concordat, along with its torn signature page. When Jan Oosterbeek, a Dutchman in The Hague, saw what the Vatican had published, his whole world changed. He knew what the Vatican said was not true. It did not have the real Concordat and had published a forgery. And he knew where the real Concordat was. He had only to retrieve it, and he would be a multimillionaire. But its retrieval would not be easy. The document was buried in the crypt of a remote abbey in Italy, where he and three others, a Frenchman, Molay, an Englishman, Lancaster, and their leader, an American Major Packman, were hidden from the Germans during World War II. The door to the crypt could only be opened by playing the notes of a secret unwritten sonata on the organ in the abbey's chapel. The abbot taught Packman the notes in the event that the Germans came without warning. The Germans appeared suddenly, and Packman and the others became prisoners of war. The Germans killed the monks for harboring the enemy and blew up the building where they lived, burying the crypt beneath a pile of rubble. Retrieval of the document would require digging down several feet to the door of the crypt. But this would not be a problem. Molay and Lancaster were still alive and could help with that. The critical problem was the unwritten sonata. Packman had died since the war, and he was the only person in the world who knew the secret note to it. Unless his young widow, Kathy Packman, who played the piano, had learned the notes to it from him.
That was a synopsis of the novel The Missing Concordat. And we're delighted to welcome the novel's author, Norman Hubley. Norman, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm honored.
We're glad to have you.
Yeah.
Norman, there are authors and there are published authors.
Yeah.
And as you know so well, sometimes it's not easy to become a published author. Now, The Missing Concordat was your second book.
That's right.
But could you take a moment to tell us about your first book and how you finally got it published?
Well, I wrote it over 30 years ago, and it took me 2 years to write it, and then it took me 30 years to get it published. And I wouldn't give up on it, and I kept trying it. There were discouraging periods, but while I was trying to get the first book published, which was called The Beyond Vengeance, that's when I wrote this one. So I was writing a book and trying to get a book published.
We should note that your first book was actually published in 2010.
Yeah.
And The Missing Concordat was published in 2013.
That's right, 3 years later. And by the same publisher, which is a publisher in Frederick, Maryland. And I just can say that it's not easy to get one published, and it's very exciting. And I think the fact that I did get one published helped get the second one published.
Sure. I didn't know what a concordat was until I read your second book. It is, of course, an agreement between a pope and a government.
Well, it doesn't have to be a pope. The way I describe it is it's a fancy name for an agreement. It's usually between two countries or two states, not individuals, but in this case, it was between the Pope and Hitler.
It's an interesting story. Where did it come from? What was the genesis of this book?
Well, back when I was a lawyer back in the 70s, I had occasion to go over to Europe a lot for the client and see witnesses and so forth. And my wife would come over after I had been over there, and then we'd rent a car and we'd tour around Europe and met a lot of interesting people, went to a lot of interesting places. And then when my cases kind of settled down, I thought, I think I could write a story about it and take advantage of what I did see and meet over there, and use some of the characters over there. And it didn't come easy, but that's where I got it from.
You talk about interesting places, and you take the reader to interesting places when we read the book.
Yeah, that's nice. I've had people say they liked it, that I took them to Europe.
You couldn't write a book like this without great research. Could you tell
Oh
us
yeah,
about that?
a lot of research. And what I did there was I can give you one example, which is in this book. And I wanted to know, as I mentioned, an organ. And I was curious, so I asked a person that did play the organ. They also played the piano, but I said, if a person can play the piano, can they play the organ that they never saw before? And the answer was, yeah, maybe they could do that. I said, how about if it was in the dark? They said, no, that would be pretty difficult to do, to play an organ that you'd never seen before in darkness. So, and that's in the case. So I read that. I took my book, drafts of my book over to Europe, and I would take friends that I had met over there, and I'd say, and I'm going to read you a section about something that happens in the book. Take me there. And then I did that with the people in Holland, and I said, read this, and then take me to a place that was like that. And then when they took me there, they looked up, and I said, what's the name of the street? That big, long Dutch name. And it was the Street of the Diamond Makers. So now that was something I didn't know, so when I came back, I put it in the book. So I said, well, it maybe seemed like I had been there before I read the book, but I didn't. Yeah.
You talked about the sonata, and that's an interesting element of the book, something a little bit unusual.
Yeah.
The oldest adage in writing is write what you know. Do you have musical talent or musical interest that led to including the sonata in the book?
Well, I can't say I had any of those. I had what I think is a vivid imagination. And I spent a lot of time researching both those books, spending time with people and writing down the notes. I'll tell you something that I had to do is kind of interesting, I think. In the second book, it's really two plots that collide with one another. The books are quite different in that sense, the first book and this book. In this book, I would, every morning before I went to work, I'd have a paper all around the den. And while I was putting my tie on, that would be chapter 1, chapter 2, I think like that. Because if you're writing a novel, remember, it's not true. So what happens there is that if somebody learns something in the second chapter, they can't learn it for the first time in the fourth chapter. Mm-hmm. So I would go in there, and I'd find I have to go and change this and change that. So that's how I did it. But anyway, and I like all my characters, even the ones that are not good eggs. Yeah, well, yeah.
Norm, a lot of authors say that the characters actually lead them along through the plot of the book.
Well, that's
that
true.
To you, didn't it?
Yeah, that's a scary feeling. I think I may have mentioned that to you somewhere along the line, because when I was typing the books back in the old days like that, I didn't have a computer, IBM typewriter. But it's very hard to describe it, but I would at times be typing alone in the room, and I'd start to type, and I have the feeling that the characters would say, no, we don't want to do that. And I almost felt like the characters were getting in the story, making me do things. So,
are any of the characters based either loosely or in any way based on people that you know?
oh yeah, a lot. Oh yeah, a lot. Yeah, and very much so. I don't use them by name, but yeah, that was a big factor.
That's because you're a lawyer. You can't use them by name.
Well, the lawyer, yeah. Well, I did do that, and a lot. There's a kind of interesting in the first book. There's a chapter about judo, and so I wrote. I was surprised people really liked that. Even the women liked it, and the men liked it, and I had done some of that, and so I just made people do things I couldn't do, and things like that. But I want to make sure that I get to read another section, and if this is a good time, I'll do it. Of you, tell me.
Well, I guess it's as good a time as any.
All right, because that one was the first thing I read was just a kind of a précis, but this is an excerpt, so you get a chance to hear my writing. Okay, this is, they have titles, and this one has the title Villa d'Este, Rome, September 7, 1978. The spectacular beauty of Rome's Villa d'Este is enhanced by the knowledge that the force creating the hundreds of fountains there, some spurting higher than a 10-story building, is simply gravity. Harnessed by the Romans in an ingenious system of underground pipes and valves designed 9 centuries ago. So well is the system designed that even today the fountains will still flow in perfect harmony, surrounding modern-day visitors, as it did their Roman counterparts, with the relaxing sound of gently gurgling water. The man walking beside Monsignor Grappi on the footpath Via di Pensa was anything but relaxed. He was Giulio Sigliano, Don of the province of Lazio, a man not accustomed to being told what to do. He scowled as he listened to the message the Monsignor had brought to him from Cardinal Borelli. He shook his head. What His Eminence asks cannot be done. I cannot kill 4 foreigners, one of them a woman, in the province of another Don, without his consent. No, it is necessary that Don Falzani be consulted. Not to consult him would violate the code of Ricambiari. His Eminence knows that. The Monsignor walked slowly, his head bowed, his hands folded in front of him, as if he was saying the rosary. His Eminence does not wish anyone to know of this matter until it has been concluded. Sigliano continued to protest. But surely Don Falzani. Grappi interrupted him. His Eminence considers Falzani untrustworthy. He is a young Don with allegiances elsewhere in the Vatican. His voice hardened. Falzani is not to hear even a rumor of the matter. The Via di Pensa ended in a small fountain where a thin stream of water trickles from the grinning mouth of a gargoyle, separating 2 bronze lovers reaching to embrace. Sigliano suggested an alternative. If the matter can be taken care of here in Lazio, it is as good as done already. The Monsignor shook his head. No, it must be done in Tuscany. His Eminence has his reasons. The Don of Lazio shrugged. Then there's nothing I can do. I cannot violate Ricambiari. Grappi paused at the fountain. His fingers tested the water trickling from the gargoyle's mouth. Giulio, how long have you been Don of Lazio? I have not counted the years. Why do you ask? It has been 20 years, Giulio, a long time to be Don of the most coveted province in Italy. Would you not agree? A few small beads of sweat appeared on Sigliano's forehead. He wiped them off with the back of his hand. I will admit His Eminence has played a role in it, if that is what you are getting at. Grappi half smiled. You understate the case. Giulio. The truth is, you have enjoyed your longevity only because of his eminence. That even today there are those with influence who would have your body at the bottom of the Tiber if it were not for the favor with which he regards you. Sigliano's forehead was now covered with beads of sweat. He turned to the Monsignor. I would not want his eminence to view me as ungrateful. It is just that Grappi continued to play with the stream of water in the fountain. I am only the messenger, Don Sigliano. I cannot speak for his eminence, but I can tell you this. His voice hardened. I have observed his evidence for many years, and have never seen him more importance to any matter. His disappointment will be great, so great, I believe, it may cause him to ponder whether you are really the one to be the Don of Lazio. Sigliano loosened the collar of his shirt. For several minutes he did not say anything. Then he turned to Grappi. I think you have misunderstood me, Monsignor. I was not saying I would refuse his eminence's request. I was simply pointing out the difficulties involved. Grappi smiled. Of course. You just wanted to be sure his eminence appreciated the depth of your loyalty. I understand. The Don of Lazio took a large handkerchief out of his pocket and wiped his forehead. I will need time to prepare. Grappi nodded. Things have been arranged, so you will have the time you need. He withdrew his hand from the fountain and shook the water off his fingers. The small drops fell like a blessing on the outstretched arms of the bronze lovers. He turned and started back along the Via Pensa. Come, Giulio, as we walk back, I will explain to you what it is you are to do. They had only taken a few steps when Grappi put his hand on Sigliano's shoulder and pointed out across the gardens. Truly remarkable, is it not, Don Sigliano, how all this around us is possible? He smiled. I mean how it is all made possible by the right use of natural pressure.
Norman Hubley reading from his book, The Missing Concordat. I'm Pete Solomon, and this is On the Bookshelf. Norman, you talk about the Pope, and writing about the Pope must be interesting because he is such a huge figure in the world, not just the Catholic Church, and yet so few people ever get to see him, so few people ever get a chance to have an audience with him. How difficult was it to make the Pope into a character in your book?
Well, the aspect of the book is that it's in the book, but it's not. I didn't touch on it. The Pope later on, after the Pope is here, I can't say the current Pope because the one before him. There was a Pope after John Paul died, who was a liberal. I got to back up. John the Third, Pope John Paul III, 23rd he was. He's the one who kind of started to liberalize the whole church. And what happened is that when he died, then Pope Paul was in, and there's a Pope in here who wants to get a very liberal Pope in, to get back to where they were liberal. And one of the characters in here decides that no, and that's part of the plot, he's going to use the Concordat to it's a damn complicated thing, to blackmail the Pope. And well, the new Pope who came in only was a Pope for 38 days or something like that. And as I say, he was found dead in bed with his reading glasses still on. And it was said he was the result of a massive heart attack. Well, that may have been, but in my book, I've webbed a story all around that. And I remember when the Pope came, the next Pope came in is the one who was from, he's now a saint, I guess, who was the first Pope in 500 years who wasn't an Italian. It was a Polish. And I was in Europe when Papa, they were said in the papers, so I used him.
Karol Wojtyła.
What?
Karol Wojtyła.
Watui, that's right. It's just his name, yeah. And so the question, I leave the book at the very end with it says in the very end here, I think there's even a picture of me in here, but in the very end, he say 5 days after Cathy's return from Italy, Pope John Paul, formerly Archbishop Albino Lusani of Venice, was found dead, sitting up in bed, still wearing his glasses. It appeared he was the victim of a massive heart attack. So that's where the book ends.
One of the interesting elements of your book is you combine the activity of real people with the characters that you've created. That has to be an interesting challenge.
Well, yeah, I have to make them. Yeah, what you have to do there, you have to have in both books. You have to have a chronology. There's a real chronology, and then there's a chronology of the book, because you can't be writing about someone at a time that it's not fits the time frame. Yeah, so that's why. Remember I told you about the putting the stuff on the wall and stuff like that to make sure there's a lot to going in to keeping it so that a lot of research and and making sure you don't have somebody doing something that's an anachronism. I remember that really. So I would go and research to see when did they have a bulldozer? When did they call it a bulldozer? Because in the other book I talk about a fellow sitting on the bulldozer when they were starting the beginning of the Maginot Line. And I went, no, wait a minute, I got to make sure that they call it a bulldozer then. But you do it, and that's part of the fun of writing a book, I think, anyway.
Norm, when you were an attorney, and you were both a prosecutor and later a defense attorney, your job was the law.
Yep.
When you're a writer, your job is writing.
Yeah.
Did you set as a goal writing a certain number of pages a day, a week? How was the process?
Well, what I did is that I took when I first started to write the first book, and I did the same thing in the second book, is I decided I'm going to get a notebook, and I'm going to put a note in every day, a log, I call it. Oh, I can't get up to it, but I brought one. And so I would, in both cases, I made myself make an entry every day. And a lot of times the entry would say, didn't do anything today, but I would do, and I used it for putting down ideas and doing things that I learned, questions that raised like that, and kept that all along as kind of research all the way along. See, and it made me keep going, because I write it. If I didn't do any work, I put it there anyway to kind of embarrass myself and to keep going. Don't quit, and it worked.
Well, when you started the book, as you told us, you had an idea. But did the book end a little differently than you thought it would because the characters carried you along?
Oh yeah, it changed a lot. I mean, I don't know how anybody. I've heard there have been authors that the one that I think it's Shirley Jackson wrote the Lottery, and what I heard is that she thought about doing some shopping. And he came back and wrote it and didn't change a word of it. It's not a very long one, and boy, that was not me. I must have draft 1, draft 10, draft 6, and all that. And my wife, at Chicky, now did the same thing in the second book for me. They would edit it and look for typos. And they both basically did the same thing. I would look and make the changes, but then they would have in there these little squirrely lines on the margin. And I said, "What do they mean?" He says, "It means it's not interesting." And they were very valuable, comment. Yeah.
So what you're saying is, writing is not a lonely process; it's a team effort.
Well, it's both. It's both. I think that's why at the beginning of the book you say gratitude to this and gratitude to that, and that's like the fellow told me about playing the organ. But it's a lonely piece of work. I mean, you I think sometime I remember I got up in the middle of the night and wrote, and then other times that you're like constipated. You can't get beyond the next page. But I'd say it's more lonely than it is the other.
But it's rewarding, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it's rewarding. Of course, very rewarding if it get published, and then you get people who call you and say they liked it, and a good story, and there's a fellow down the golf club, and he read it, and I don't really play golf with him. I don't know much about it. At one time, I was walking by, and he said, "You know that story of the Missing Concordat, the Missing Concordat?" He said, "That's a good story, Norman." Yeah.
That's great praise. Now, as a lawyer, you probably never asked a witness a question you didn't already know the answer to. So I'm going to ask you a question I know the answer to.
Okay, good.
What are you working on now?
Well, I'm working on something different in the sense that it's my first effort at nonfiction, but it's not nonfiction in the sense that if you go to try to find a publisher or anything like that, they want to know what tools do you want us to use and what. That's not my book. But it does fall under the category of what they call a nonfiction narrative, I think is the phrase. And so I've done that, and that story, it's true, and it's a different ballgame, true and fiction completely. I'm not saying one's harder than the other or anything, but that's what I'm doing now, and I'm enjoying it. I basically have finished it. I haven't got it published yet.
It's part of the process.
Yeah.
Norm, we thank you very much for sharing The Missing Concordat with us and about your writing process and all of the things that it took to get the book written and then published. It's a wonderful story. I have inside information that it's available at a library near us, but where can somebody purchase the book?
What?
Where can somebody purchase your book?
Well, they can get it on Amazon. Has it, and I can get a copy for someone if they want one autographed sometime. And there's a little bookstore down the center house, the other book. But I've kind of, you really got to be lucky to get a real viral thing.
I understand.
I haven't done that.
Thank you very much for being with us, Norm. We really appreciate it, and we wish you best of luck in the next endeavor, and we invite people to enjoy The Missing Concordat.
Okay.
We certainly did.
It's been an honor to be here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you. I'm Pete Solomon. We'll see you next time on the Bookshelf.
Millions of loving cats and dogs in shelters and rescues need our help to find a home. So go to the shelterpetproject.org, search your local shelters and rescues, and adopt already.